We're at a boiling point. The global stage is shaken by a declaration that could change everything. On March 4, 2025, the U.S. imposed new tariffs on Chinese goods, under the directive of none other than Donald Trump. The response? The Chinese government isn't holding back. They're not only preparing for an economic battle, they're hinting at something much bigger. A war. Yes, a potential military conflict. As tensions rise between these two economic superpowers, the ripple effects are being felt worldwide, with markets on edge and governments scrambling. But what does this mean for the average consumer? And how will this impact economies around the world, including Brazil? Stick with me as we dive deep into the economic warfare between the U.S. and China and what it means for you. The U.S. just raised the stakes in its ongoing trade war with China. Under the leadership of Donald Trump, the U.S. has slapped additional tariffs on Chinese products, escalating tensions that were already simmering. But what happened next took everyone by surprise. The Chinese government didn't just respond with words, they came out swinging with an aggressive declaration. Not only are they ready for a trade war, but they also stated they're prepared for a full-blown military conflict if necessary. This bold statement sent shockwaves through global markets. Why the escalation? What does this really mean for the balance of power in international trade? It's clear that China is sending a strong signal that they're not backing down anytime soon. What's even more concerning is China's announcement to increase its defense budget by 7.2%, signaling an arms buildup that could rival that of many superpowers. A 250% increase in defense spending over the past 12 years under Xi Jinping's leadership shows that China is preparing for a potential confrontation, whether it's economic or military. The world is watching, and many are wondering if we're on the brink of a new kind of global conflict. What does this mean for the global economy? More importantly, what does it mean for you and me as consumers in the middle of this geopolitical chess game? Donald Trump's justification for the new tariffs is rooted in a fight against the influx of dangerous drugs into the U.S., particularly fentanyl from China. He claims that these tariffs are part of a broader strategy to protect American citizens from the consequences of illegal drug trafficking. But, let's be real, is that the full story? Or is this just a convenient excuse to apply more pressure on China and try to balance the trade deficit? Trump has been clear that he wants to bring the trade deficit between the U.S. and China under control. And with a whopping $270 billion gap, his strategy is to hit China where it hurts economically. The pattern is becoming familiar. Trump imposes tariffs, gives a deadline for negotiations, and pressures the opposing country to back down or face the consequences. We've seen this with Mexico, Canada, and even Ukraine. But will it work with China, a nation that's not as easily bullied as its smaller counterparts? The stakes are much higher, and the economic fallout could be catastrophic for both countries. So, where does that leave us as consumers? Well, if this trade war continues, it's U.S., the everyday people, who will feel the pinch, as prices rise and goods become harder to come by. The economic ripple effects of this trade war are already being felt around the globe, and countries like Brazil are not exempt. While the U.S. and China engage in a tariff standoff, Brazil finds itself caught in the crossfire, as Trump has also targeted Brazilian imports with higher tariffs. But here's the twist. Brazil's reaction has been less about negotiation and more about retaliation. The government has hinted at imposing tariffs on U.S. goods in response, but experts warn that this kind of tit-for-tat strategy could backfire. The U.S. is a key trading partner for Brazil, and disrupting that relationship could have long-lasting consequences for the Brazilian economy. Retaliating against the U.S. might seem like the logical move for some, but specialists argue that Brazil should focus on diplomacy rather than escalating the trade war. They suggest that Brazil needs to take a more strategic, calculated approach, one that considers both national interests and global positioning. The problem, however, lies in the current administration's approach. With Lula at the helm, many fear that the Brazilian government will let ideology take precedence over pragmatic diplomacy, which could lead to unnecessary economic harm. In times of global instability, it's essential that Brazil finds a balanced approach, one that safeguards its own interests while keeping international relations intact. At the heart of the ongoing trade wars lies a bigger issue, the debate between free market principles and government intervention. In the US, and Trump's strategy of protectionism through tariffs and trade barriers has been a defining feature of his administration. The idea is simple: protect American industries by making foreign goods more expensive, forcing consumers to buy domestic products. While this may seem like a win for U.S. industry, it's a loss for consumers who face higher prices at the checkout. The same trend is seen in Brazil, where the government has increased tariffs on Chinese goods in an effort to protect local industries. But here's the kicker: imposing higher tariffs on imports doesn't necessarily lead to long-term economic growth or competitiveness. It's a short-term fix that may hurt the very people it aims to protect, the consumers. The real solution lies in boosting local industry competitiveness through innovation, investment in technology, and removing bureaucratic barriers that hinder business growth. It's not about protectionism, it's about creating an environment where domestic companies can thrive without relying on artificial barriers that limit free trade. So, what's the real cost of these tariffs, and who ends up paying the price? You guessed it, us, the consumers. Trade wars don't just affect tariffs and prices, they disrupt entire global supply chains. When the US and China impose tariffs, companies that rely on components or finished products from both countries face higher costs and delays. For instance, industries like technology, automobiles, and manufacturing are highly integrated into the global supply chain. So, how does this impact you as a consumer? Well, products might take longer to reach the shelves, and prices will likely increase as businesses pass on these additional costs to the end consumer. This interconnectedness means that the ripple effects of tariffs spread far beyond the two countries involved. Countries that depend heavily on Chinese-made goods, such as electronics and machinery, are particularly vulnerable. But here's the catch: while some industries suffer, others may thrive by filling in the gaps left by disrupted supply chains. This is a perfect example of how trade wars, despite seeming like a negative force, also create new business opportunities in emerging sectors. But will consumers be willing to pay more for these alternatives? It's a complex dynamic that's reshaping the global marketplace. While the US-China trade war primarily focuses on these two powerhouses, the effects are felt far and wide, especially in emerging markets and developing economies. Countries in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa are being caught in the crossfire, as their economic futures are increasingly tied to the shifting tides of global trade. For instance, Brazil, which is highly reliant on exports to both China and the US too, faces tough choices on how to respond to tariffs and retaliatory measures. Many of these countries are seeing their export markets shrink as US tariffs make their goods more expensive, and Chinese tariffs do the same. Worse still, developing countries that depend on Chinese infrastructure projects or American investments are facing uncertainty about future economic growth. The global economy's interdependence means that tensions between major powers can have a direct impact on the financial stability of these smaller nations. What can be done to protect these emerging economies? What strategies can they adopt to survive this global storm? With the US in the midst of a trade war, many investors are wondering how the dollar will fare in this new global landscape. Historically, the US dollar has been the dominant currency in international trade, but with China pushing for greater use of the yuan and the US increasing tariffs on foreign goods, we might be on the verge of a major shift in global currency markets. The dollar has long been a safe haven in times of economic instability. But as tensions rise, will this continue? If the U.S. is seen as a less reliable trading partner, countries may start looking elsewhere for stable currencies. For example, the Chinese yuan could rise in prominence as more countries turn to it for trade deals, undermining the dollar's global supremacy. This would have far-reaching implications for global finance, including how foreign investments flow into emerging markets and how businesses and consumers pay for goods and services. Understanding how shifts in global currency markets could affect you is critical, as changes in exchange rates could impact everything from the cost of imports to travel expenses. As governments impose tariffs and trade barriers, the world's most innovative companies are finding ways to sidestep these issues. Technology is playing a crucial role in this process, enabling businesses to find new solutions to trade disruptions. For instance, automation, artificial intelligence, and advanced manufacturing techniques can help reduce reliance on imported goods or create new alternatives to existing products. In a world where trade wars might limit access to certain products, innovation is the key to remaining competitive. In this context, companies in both the U.S. and China are investing heavily in research and development to maintain their edge. But the question is, will this lead to a global race for technological supremacy? And what role will consumers play in this evolving landscape? Will we see an explosion of new products that help mitigate the negative effects of tariffs? Or will consumers be left with fewer choices and higher prices? The future of trade may very well depend on technological advancements, and it's important for us to understand how these changes could impact the marketplace. While most discussions about trade wars focus on economics, there's another side to this issue: the environment. The U.S.-China trade war has the potential to influence global environmental policies and practices, especially when it comes to manufacturing and production. Countries may prioritize domestic production over more sustainable or environmentally friendly methods in a bid to reduce dependence on foreign goods. And this can lead to increased pollution and waste. Moreover, international agreements on climate change could be at risk, as economic tensions make it harder for global powers to cooperate on environmental issues. China's reliance on coal as an energy source and the US's fluctuating stance on climate policies make it unclear whether either country will continue to pursue green initiatives in the midst of this economic standoff. How will global trade conflicts impact the fight against climate change? The environmental consequences of these tensions could be significant, affecting everything from air quality to resource consumption. Trade wars don't just affect your wallet, they also have a psychological impact. When tariffs are imposed, consumers often feel a sense of uncertainty about the future. Prices rise, products become harder to find, and economic instability creates an underlying sense of anxiety. This uncertainty affects consumer confidence and, in turn, affects spending habits. If consumers fear that prices will continue to rise or that products will be unavailable, they may reduce their spending, leading to a slowdown in economic growth. The impact on everyday life can be significant, as individuals worry about job security, inflation, and the broader economic outlook. This psychological effect can cause ripple effects in markets, with businesses adjusting their strategies to account for changing consumer behavior. So, how do consumers cope in such a turbulent environment? It's crucial to understand the mental and emotional toll that trade wars can take on individuals and families, and to explore strategies for maintaining financial resilience during uncertain times. The world is changing, and it's important for us to stay informed about these developments. The trade wars between the U.S. and China and their impact on global markets are just the beginning. How do you think these events will unfold? What's the best approach for Brazil retaliation or diplomacy? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share this content with your friends and family, so they too can stay up to date on the latest geopolitical shifts. The more we understand these issues, the better equipped we are to make informed decisions in our own lives. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to get all our latest insights.